The Senate chamber was silent, heavy with the kind of tension that made every breath sound louder than it should. The lights above glared down from their brass fixtures, turning the polished mahogany desks into glossy mirrors of the faces behind them. The air carried that charged electricity only Washington could generate: ambition, judgment, and just a hint of fear. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett adjusted her chair behind the microphone. Her hands, steady but deliberate, flipped through the thick folder in front of her. She wasn't nervous, she never was, but she could feel the gravity of this day pressing on her shoulders. The room wasn't just filled with senators, aides, and journalists. It was filled with history waiting to be rewritten. Across from her sat Michelle Obama, poised, graceful, and formidable in a way that silenced even her harshest critics. The former First Lady had returned to the Capitol not for ceremony, but for confrontation. Her nomination for a major political post had divided the nation, and today's hearing would decide her future. The two women couldn't have been more different, in background and temperament, in how they wielded power. Yet both radiated strength that could shake the chamber itself. A low murmur of cameras clicking broke the stillness as Jasmine leaned toward the mic. "Mrs. Obama," she began, her tone measured, almost courteous. "Thank you for being here today. I know the country's been waiting for this conversation." Michelle offered a small nod, that same serene composure she'd carried through 8 years in the White House. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Congresswoman." That single exchange drew a flicker of reaction from the audience, a ripple of intrigue. This wasn't going to be a polite exchange of words. It was already shaping up to be something more. Two forces of nature colliding, not in hostility but in principle. Jasmine leaned back, folding her arms. "Before we go into specifics about your nomination, I want to understand your vision. You've spoken at length about unity, about rebuilding trust in government, but in the last few years, many Americans feel left out of that promise. They see a system that favors power over people. What do you say to them?" Michelle's eyes held Jasmine's without flinching. "I say that the system only changes when the people inside it have the courage to confront its flaws. I've seen that courage. In activists and young voters and women who never thought they'd belong in rooms like this one. My vision isn't just about healing, it's about accountability." The room absorbed her words in silence. Even the sound of the cameras slowed, as if the moment demanded stillness. Jasmine nodded slightly, flipping through another page. "Accountability is a beautiful word, Mrs. Obama. It sounds good on paper and it plays well on television. But in practice, and it's rare. You talk about courage, but let's be real. Washington has never rewarded courage. It rewards calculation." Michelle smiled, but there was steel in her eyes. "And yet here you are, Congresswoman. Still fighting, still speaking truth to power." That subtle counterpunch drew a low murmur from the press row. Jasmine didn't react outwardly, but her gaze sharpened. She was ready for this. She had come prepared not to attack, but to expose. To strip away the veil of charm and rhetoric that so many in the room had been enchanted by. "Let's talk specifics," Jasmine said, her tone tightening. "During your tenure as First Lady, you pushed for initiatives in education, health, and nutrition, commendable, no doubt. But some critics argue that those efforts were more symbolic than systemic. Programs came and went, but the disparities remained. What makes you believe that this time, under your leadership, things would be any different?" Michelle didn't rush her answer.
"She never did."
Her hands rested lightly on the table, fingers intertwined. "Change isn't measured in one term or one program. It's measured in the seeds we plant, and the ones we protect until they bloom. I may not have changed every system, but I changed the way a generation sees itself. That's not symbolism, that's foundation." There was a pause. Jasmine studied her, head slightly tilted as if weighing not the words but the conviction behind them. "Foundation," she repeated softly. "I can respect that. But there's something about foundations, Mrs. Obama. They're only as strong as what's built on top." She leaned forward, her tone dropping into something quieter, more dangerous. "You've been out of public office for years. Since then, the political landscape has changed. Darker, sharper, less forgiving. Do you believe your style of leadership, that calm, unifying presence, can survive in a world that rewards outrage over reason?" Michelle's eyes flickered with something, not irritation but intensity. "I don't intend to survive it, Congresswoman. I intend to change it. That line landed like a strike. A few in the audience even exhaled audibly. Jasmine didn't smile, but there was a flash of admiration behind her steady gaze. Michelle wasn't deflecting. She was claiming her power outright. The chairperson cleared his throat softly, reminding them both to proceed with decorum, though everyone knew decorum had already become optional. Jasmine continued, her voice even, but with a razor's edge. Mrs. Obama, you and I both know what power looks like. It's not polite. It's not comfortable. It's not photo ops and speeches about hope. It's choices, hard ones. Ones that leave people angry with you. Can you tell this committee one moment in your career where you chose conviction over convenience? Michelle's response came with no hesitation. Yes, she said simply. When I stood beside a man the world was determined to tear down, and refused to let him be torn alone. When I spoke truth about the pain of this country, knowing half of it didn't want to hear it. And when I walked away from power instead of letting it define me. For a heartbeat, Jasmine said nothing. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers brushed the edge of the folder, and then she exhaled. Slow. Deliberate. You still believe in walking away? She said, her tone quieter now. I respect that. But what if the time for walking away has passed? Michelle looked up. Then maybe it's time for walking in. A sharp hush fell over the room. It wasn't just dialogue anymore, it was philosophy. Two women, two visions of how to lead a fractured nation. The session paused for a recess, but no one in the chamber moved for several seconds. The power of their exchange lingered like smoke in the air, unresolved, alive. As the crowd slowly dispersed, aides whispering and cameras flashing, Jasmine remained seated, her gaze fixed on the empty chair across from her. She wasn't sure whether she'd just been challenged or inspired. Maybe both. Outside reporters scrambled for sound bites. Commentators prepared their takes, and America waited to see what would happen when the hearing resumed. Inside the chamber, two names would define the next chapter of political history: Jasmine Crockett, Michelle Obama, and neither of them was done yet. The chamber filled again after recess, but the energy had changed. The tension was no longer silent, it hummed. Journalists whispered in corners, aides shuffled papers nervously, and a few senators exchanged glances that said everything without words. Everyone could sense it. The first round had ended in a draw, and the next would decide everything. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett returned to her seat, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She had spent the break reviewing her notes, but it wasn't the documents that preoccupied her. It was the tone of Michelle Obama's last words, that calm conviction that lingered like a challenge. Michelle Obama re-entered moments later, escorted by a quiet aide. The cameras followed her every step. She carried herself with the grace of someone accustomed to scrutiny, but there was something new in her eyes, a readiness, a tempered fire. She knew this was the part where conviction met consequence. When the chair gave the floor back to Jasmine, the room stilled again. Mrs. Obama, Jasmine began, her tone steady. Let's pick up where we left off. Before the break, you said you wanted to change the system, not survive it. Let's explore what that means. Michelle inclined her head slightly. Of course, Jasmine continued, her words sharp but controlled. Change often requires confrontation. Sometimes it means challenging the very institutions that once embraced you. The public adores you, but adoration doesn't always translate to policy. How do you plan to navigate power when popularity begins to fade? Michelle's lips curved in a restrained smile. Congresswoman, I've lived long enough to know popularity fades faster than principle. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to be heard. Jasmine leaned forward slightly. Then you understand what that costs. Power doesn't reward the loud. It isolates them. Michelle met her gaze without wavering. Maybe isolation is the price for leading from the front. There it was, that defiance cloaked in grace. Jasmine recognized it instantly. It was something she herself had lived. The chamber seemed to shrink around them. Two women from different paths, bound by the same unwillingness to yield. Jasmine's next question came more pointedly. Mrs. Obama, some say your legacy is built on idealism. Beautiful words, but little policy. That you inspired millions but changed little structurally. If that's true, how do you expect to Lead a government machine that only listens to power, not poetry. The comment hit with precision. For a heartbeat, the air was still. Then Michelle spoke, her voice low but commanding. "I've heard that before," she said. "From men who mistook empathy for weakness. From critics who believed legislation was the only form of leadership. But change doesn't start on paper. It starts in people. You don't pass a bill to make a young black girl believe she belongs in the room. You show up, and you prove it." The audience murmured. Quietly, reverently. Even Jasmine felt a pulse of something like pride beneath her restraint. Michelle's words didn't dodge the question, they reframed it. Jasmine took a moment before responding. "You speak about belonging, Mrs. Obama. But this system doesn't care who belongs. It only cares who endures. I've seen people with purpose fall apart under pressure because they tried to play fair. Tell me, how do you plan to fight a system that's been engineered to break people like us?" The words "people like us" hung in the air with weight. Not political, but personal. For the first time, Michelle's expression softened. "I fight it by refusing to become it," she said quietly. "I've spent years watching how power corrodes empathy, how ambition silences integrity. I won't trade one poison for another." Jasmine's brow furrowed. "So you'd rather risk losing it all?" Michelle's eyes didn't waver. "If the only way to win is to become what I despise, then yes." There was silence. Heavy, pure silence. Even the senators shifted uncomfortably. No one expected this level of candor. Jasmine exhaled slowly, her voice lowering. "That's a rare answer in this room, Mrs. Obama." Michelle smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the problem with this room." The corners of Jasmine's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. "You think the system can still be reformed?" Michelle hesitated, not out of doubt, but reflection. "I think the system has to be reminded who it serves." "By whom?" Jasmine asked. "Politicians? Activists? The same people who profit from the chaos?" Michelle shook her head. "By women like us." That answer, so simple, so unapologetic, sent another ripple through the audience. Jasmine sat back, absorbing it. For the first time, the hearing didn't feel like a confrontation. It felt like recognition. Two perspectives clashing not out of animosity, but necessity. Jasmine flipped her folder closed. "You know," she said quietly, "when I first read your nomination file, I didn't think you'd last through this hearing. I thought the pressure would expose the softness. But you're not soft." Michelle's eyes glinted. "Neither are you." The chair tried to interject, but no one was listening anymore. The energy between them filled the room like oxygen meeting flame. Jasmine continued, her tone shifting, not softer but more introspective. "We both come from places that were never supposed to reach this floor. We both had to fight twice as hard just to be underestimated. And now, here we are, sitting across from each other when we should have been sitting beside each other." Michelle nodded slowly. "Maybe this isn't a fight, Congresswoman. Maybe it's a mirror." That struck deep. The chamber fell quiet again, but this silence was different. Not tension, but understanding. After a long pause, Jasmine said, "Then let's stop pretending this is about confirmation. It's about conviction." Michelle straightened, her voice steady. "And conviction doesn't need approval." A subtle wave of emotion crossed Jasmine's face. She looked around the room, the cameras, the notes, the colleagues watching, with rehearsed neutrality, and realized the truth. No headline could capture what had just happened here. It wasn't a political hearing anymore. It was a reckoning between two women who understood what it meant to carry entire movements on their backs. The chair finally spoke, his voice formal but reverent. "The committee will reconvene tomorrow to deliberate." But everyone knew deliberation had already happened, not in paperwork but in principle. Michelle stood, collecting her notes. Jasmine rose too, meeting her halfway. For a moment, the world beyond the chamber didn't exist. No cameras, no pundits, no politics. Just two women who had faced the storm and refused to bend. Michelle extended her hand. No hard feelings, Congresswoman? Jasmine shook it firmly. Hard questions, not hard feelings. Michelle smiled, that calm, unshakable smile that had carried through years of scrutiny. That's how it should be. As she turned to leave, Jasmine watched her go, the sound of camera shutters echoing like distant thunder. Aides rushed in, reporters shouted questions, but Jasmine stayed still, thoughtful, resolute. When the room finally emptied, she whispered to herself, maybe this time we'll get it right. Outside the Capitol, the evening sun burned gold against the marble steps. The world was already spinning its narrative. Crockett challenges Obama, the showdown that shook the chamber. Two visions of power collide. But, beneath all that noise, something deeper had shifted. The public had witnessed something rare. Two women of power refusing to diminish one another to prove their worth. In living rooms and newsrooms across the nation, people replayed the footage not for scandal but for substance. They saw conviction without cruelty, strength without destruction. And in that reflection, between confrontation and kinship, history found its next chapter. Jasmine Crockett and Michelle Obama. Different voices, same fire, the kind that doesn't burn and it builds.